learners, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here for part 2 of our Anatomy of Stability series. Now, in our first installment, we looked at the broad strokes of how structures stay standing, right? But today, we're getting incredibly specific. We're going to perform a detailed deconstruction of a pad foundation. This is the unsung hero buried beneath the earth, literally carrying the massive weight of the buildings we live and work in every single day.
To do this, we're going to be analyzing a very specific, highly detailed schematic provided by Chirangoma Integrated. You can actually see their official logo right there. This source diagram is going to be our map, our blueprint, and honestly, a bit of a puzzle for us to solve today. It sets the perfect stage for a real structural deep dive into the nuts and bolts, or, well, rather, the concrete and steel of modern foundations.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today's explainer. First, the anatomy of stability, then the pad base breakdown, followed by columns and reinforcement cages, and the slab assembly layers. After that, we'll do some detective work, spotting the diagram errors, and wrap up with why professional verification matters. Starting off with Section 1, Anatomy of Stability, looking at the big picture. The overarching goal here is to really understand how vastly different materials, we're talking crushed stone, poured concrete, woven steel, how they all work together as a single unit to create unshakable stability. Let's orient ourselves with this complete blueprint. Up in the top left, we have the plan view, which is basically looking straight down from above. Taking up the center and right is the cross section. Think of that like slicing the foundation in half like a cake so we can actually see the layers. Down in the bottom left, we have the precise reinforcement details, and in the bottom right, the mathematical foundation design data. Knowing how to navigate this visual information is super key to understanding the whole structure. Moving right along to Section 2, the pad base breakdown, anchoring the structure.
We're starting our spatial journey exactly where a builder would, deep underground. Check out this measurement from the plan view and the bottom of the cross section, 900 by 900 millimeters. This is the footprint of our pad base. Now, I really want you to emphasize the sheer scale of this in your mind. This wide footprint is absolutely critical because its entire job is to take the massive, concentrated, heavy load of the building coming down the column and spread it out widely and evenly across the soil beneath it. Without it, the building would just sink straight into the dirt.
Now, if you look closely at the cross-section, you can see the physical positioning of this pad. It features a solid block of concrete that's 250 millimeters deep. Notice that little triangle near the top labeled NGL. That stands for natural ground level. So this enormous 250 millimeter thick pad is buried well below that line. And to keep it firmly in place, it's heavily weighed down and covered with backfill made from excavated soil and other approved materials. Let's move over to the data and see how this builds into the underlying physics. Why does the pad need to be exactly 900 by 900 millimeters? Well, look at the foundation design data table from the bottom right. This is the invisible geological math dictating the entire design. It shows an allowable soil-bearing capacity of 150 kilonewtons per square meter, an angle of internal friction of 21 degrees, and cohesion at 10 kilonewtons per square meter. The engineers use these exact site-specific soil properties to calculate just how wide that base needs to be to prevent any sinking. All right, Section 3, columns and reinforcement cages, also known as the steel skeleton. Rising straight up from the center of our massive 900 millimeter base is the concrete column, and you'll see it has dimensions of 300 by 300 millimeters. So it's much narrower than the base, acting as the primary vertical channel for the building's weight to travel downward into the pad. Notice the grid lines inside the concrete? Those are the reinforcement steel cages. And this brilliantly illustrates the real magic of reinforced concrete. You see, concrete is incredibly strong when you compress it, but it's really weak if it bends or stretches. Steel is the exact opposite. So by embedding these steel cages within both the pad and the column, and crucially having them overlap and lock together, the structure gains immense strength. It prevents a catastrophic structural failure by ensuring the column doesn't just snap off the base under those heavy loads. On to Section 4, the slab assembly layers, where we start building upward. We're moving from the buried column up to the horizontal slab that forms the ground floor. If you look at the right side of the cross-section, you'll see a bracket showing a total slab assembly thickness of 290 millimeters. But it's not just one big chunk of concrete, right? It's a very precise sequence of layers built from the earth upward. First, right at the bottom, 150 millimeters of hardcore, which is crushed rock that gives us a solid base. Second, 40 millimeters of sand blinding, creating a nice, smooth, level surface. Third, and this is absolutely critical, a black polythene sheet acting as a damp-proof membrane, or DPM.
This literally stops ground moisture from creeping up into your house. And finally, the top layer is a 100mm cured concrete slab reinforced with mesh wire. Each of those layers has a highly specific job.
Next up, Section 5, Spotting the Diagram Errors. Time for a little detective work.
So, it's time to put on our detective hats. As detailed as the schematic is, a sharp eye reveals a truly bizarre drafting error. Down in the bottom left, under the column reinforcement details, it describes the outer steel loops holding the main bars together. But read the label. It says 9mm at storage at 225mm center to center. Wait, storage? No way! The correct structural engineering term for these loops is stirrups or links. Seeing the word storage right there is a glaring hint that an automated tool, perhaps an AI, might have misinterpreted or hallucinated text during the drafting process.
So the crucial point is that it gets even more serious than just a quirky typo. Let's look at the mathematical data for the steel reinforcement bars, the rebar. Up in the top left plan view, it explicitly calls for 13 top bars and 13 bottom bars. But if you cross-reference that with the reinforcement details box in the bottom left for the exact same pad base, it lists 20 bottom bars and 18 top bars. Wow, that is a massive mathematical contradiction in the structural design. If a builder just blindly followed one box without checking the other, the structural integrity of the entire building could be compromised.
Which perfectly leads us to Section 6, Why Professional Verification Matters. We just spotted some really serious contradictions, which illustrates exactly why we can never, ever take technical diagrams at pure face value, no matter how official they look. And actually, the diagram itself knows this. Right at the bottom center, it states this explicitly. Let's read it word for word. This design is based on typical structural detailing practices and should be verified and approved by a qualified structural engineer for specific site conditions. Catching those anomalies, like stirrups mysteriously labeled as storage or totally contradicting rebar counts, is exactly why real human engineers absolutely must review and stamp these plans based on the actual physical site.
So, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. We are entering an era where schematics like this can be generated at lightning speed. But as AI-assisted drafting becomes more and more common, is the sharp, critical eye of a human structural engineer actually more irreplaceable than ever? I think our detective work today answers that pretty clearly. Always read your diagrams critically, always question the details, and never underestimate the complexity of what lies beneath our feet. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.